program today. Thank you. And as a reminder, we are recording the program right now. So if you missed something along the way, you can review it later on. So we'll be introducing 30 women found in our collections in 30 minutes. So that means one woman in 1 minute. So as a heads up, I will be talking fast at times. If I don't finish at before when the 1 minute is over, don't worry. We want to encourage you to also look up these women yourself, do your own research, but we'll also be sending out links where you can find more information on many of these women. As you can see, many on the next bullet, many of the women's stories mentioned here can be found on our website, either through blogs, through our collections, or through the online exhibitions. So keep an eye out for that after the program. Also, going on throughout the program, since I mentioned there is a time limit, I will be having a timer that I'll start at each slide. Now there is a little bit of a beeping noise at times with this, so just as a heads up, so you're not alarmed. And also, since I'll be speaking fast, sometimes there's some mispronunciation, so sorry about that as a heads up. I'm trying to get all that information out. So, but really we want you all to enjoy it, have a fun time in this informal program, and learn about some great women in our collections. As we move forward, you'll see this here, the dates in the parentheses. Those are the years that the woman we're talking about was alive. And then if you see APS and then a year, that notes that that woman was elected to the APS. So they were a member of the APS, and that's the year they were elected. Now, not all the women were elected to the American Philosophical Society, and so you should really think, why is that? And start thinking about scholarly societies and how they really did bar women from joining them until much later. So a lot of women were doing science, they were doing great work throughout their times, but they still weren't elected to many of these societies until later on. All right, I think you've heard enough from me. Let's hear about some of the women we'll be learning about today. So as I mentioned before, with each slide, I'll be hitting the play button. You'll hear some beeping noise, so you're not alarmed. And then I'll tell you the story of that woman. Okay. All right, let's start it off. All right. Deborah Reed Franklin. Deborah Reed Franklin was born around 1708. She is the business partner as well as common law wife to Benjamin Franklin. When Benjamin was away, Deborah oversaw the business, enabling Benjamin to take part in diplomatic and scientific endeavors. As well as being a savvy businesswoman, Deborah also knew how to defend what was hers. So this letter that you see on your screen here to the right is in our collections from Deborah to Benjamin, relating about what's happening in Philadelphia during the Stamp Act riots. In this letter, Deborah tells Ben that she heard rumors that an angry mob was actually going to come to their home and burn it down. Deborah springs into action in this letter, she says, and she sends Sally away to safety. She arms herself, getting a musket from a cousin, sets up a battery in her house and dissuade the possible mob. Luckily, it never came, but it also shows Deborah in a really fierce light. If you want to learn about Deborah, check out our last virtual exhibition, Dr. Franklin, Citizen Scientist. Whew, that's one. So there you can see I'm hitting at the buzzer. So we'll move on from there. Ooh, there we go. So Mary Somerville. Let's skip the little beep. All right, Mary Somerville, astronomer Mary Somerville, was born in Scotland in 1780. She was the fourth woman elected to the APS. While she was discouraged by her family and her first husband in studying math, because they believed that women shouldn't be educated in the math, they couldn't handle it, but she still continued to educate herself. On the screen here is her book, Mechanisms of the Heavens, written in 1831. Consider an English riff on a French astronomer's book, Mécanique céleste, so she translated it, but also adapted it to make it more accessible, since she added explanations of the math and diagrams in the textbook, as you can see here. She was the first woman, so this book was a success. Different colleges used it to relate to astronomy, as well as she was able to later publish experimental results in the Royal Transactions. And while she couldn't be elected to the Royal Society as a woman, she was the only one with a bust in it. Eliza Colles. Let me hit the buzzer. Cool. Eliza Colles was an engraver, and she was born in 1775. She was the first American female map engraver. She was first taught to engrave at the age of 13. She was apprentice. She probably learned a little bit from her father, Christopher Colles, who never had the greatest luck, or his engraver, Cornelius Typeout. At some point, when her father's making her books, his engraver quits, so Eliza helps out. This diagram on your screen here was included in her father's atlas, the Geographical Ledger. As you can, her signature is actually down here for Eliza Colles. She was probably passed away during the yellow fever epidemic in the late 1700s. But you can still see her signatures on engravings like this, and you can check out Mapping a Nation, Shaping the Early American Republic to learn more about that era and map making. There we go, 2 minutes to spare, 2 seconds to spare. All right, Anne Haynes. Scientist Anne Haynes was born in 1792. She is the illegitimate daughter of Reuben Haynes II. She grew up and lived most of her life at the Wick House out in Germantown. She was well educated and interested in the science throughout her life. She collected weather data for much of her life for around 50 years. And what you see on your screen here is a page from her weather journal. At first, it was believed that this journal belonged to her cousin, Reuben Haynes III, and she might have helped out at times. But when Reuben died in 1831, scholars noticed that once he dies, the handwriting does not change. So they realized Anne was the one who was doing most of this work at the time, and she continues to do it after Reuben's death. She continues to go to different scholarly talks throughout her life. And as you can see here, she collects basic weather data that we do today: temperature, air pressure, wind speed and force, water fallen, and state of the weather. And this is all to help predict the weather and keep yourself safe. All right. See if I can speed up. There we go. Katarina Dashkova. So Russian Princess Katarina Dashkova was born in 1743. She was a good friend of Catherine the Great and helped take part in the coup that brought Catherine to power. Katarina was a friend of Benjamin Franklin as well. They met only once in real life, but continued to converse through letters throughout their lives. But she must have made an impression because Franklin put her forth to be elected to the American Philosophical Society, and she was elected in 1789. She is the first woman elected to the APS, and then it'll take until about 1860s for more women to be elected. So that's a big time gap, and again, helps show that scholarly societies women were kept and barred from scholarly societies for a lot of times. And an American woman wouldn't be elected until 1869. Katarina was the director of Russia's Imperial Academy of Sciences and Art. Whew, there we go. Lucy Say, let's start that timer. All right. Lucy Say, naturalist and scientific illustrator, Lucy W.S. Say, was born in 1801 in Connecticut. Her family were Quakers, so she grew up very educated. They believed men and women should be educated too. So she went to school. She actually went to an experimental school for girls where she learned about scientific illustration. She met her husband, Thomas Say, at one point when she was traveling to a utopian some say a utopian socialistic community, New Harmony, where a lot of different scientists were actually going as well. She would later marry her future husband, Thomas Say, and she would help him with his book, American Conchology. And she would be illustrating his book. She would make 66 of the 68 drawings of the North American mollusks and did many of coloring the plates. When her husband and engraver both died in 1834, Lucy continued her work and wound up learning engraving as well to help finish the project. She was the first woman elected to Academy of Natural Sciences. Barbara Mcclintock. Let's start that. Barbara Mcclintock, Syntogenesis Barbara Mcclintock, was born in 1902. She almost didn't go to college because her mother thought it would hurt her chances at marriage, but luckily her father pushed her to go. Mcclintock would go on to win the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1983 for her jumping genes discovery. And she made a discovery through the study through studying the hereditary characteristics of corn and how they would get different colors. And she proved that genes could jump or change positions on chromosomes. And you can see on your screen here, these are commemorative stamps for Barbara Mcclintock for her Nobel Prize win. And then also of her teaching, as she was also a teacher as well. All right, Maria Mitchell. Maria Mitchell, one of the first women elected to the APS. She was born in 1818 in Nantucket to a Quaker family. And so since she was born in a Quaker family, she was supported through education as she grew up. She shared her love of astronomy with her father, and she was one of the first American scientists to discover a comet in 1847, which she also charted. The story goes that Maria had left the party to go make observations on top of a roof. And then she noticed a blurry streak in the sky. Like, she's looking through her telescope, she realizes, hey, this is a comet. And she makes her observations, she tells her father, and they send an announcement out to different scholarly societies. Later on, she's awarded a gold medal by the King of Denmark because the king was offering prizes to those who discovered new comets. And she would go on to be the first woman elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Julia Stockton Rush. Almost didn't start the timer there. There we go. Julia Stockton Rush was born in 1759 in New Jersey to Richard Stockton and Annis Boudenois Stockton. And I would like to apologize again for pronunciation. But I'm trying my best. She was well educated. Julia was well educated, especially since her mother was actually one of the first American-born female poets published in the colonies. Julia will wind up marrying Benjamin Rush in 1776, and her collections in the APS really show a window of what it was like for a woman throughout both the American Revolution and the yellow fever epidemic. These letters are actually during the 1793 yellow fever epidemic. This letter is from Julia to Benjamin, and she is talking about really the loss of a lot of people dying of yellow fever, of their one friend not sure whether to go into the city to find family, and what they're doing. But then it finally also ends on like a motherly note where she talks to Benjamin and tells him, send something to your son and let him know you're still close by in case he's acting up. Whew. Get a little bit better with this timing. All right, Ruth Patrick. Botanist Ruth Patrick was born in 1907 in Kansas. She was known for pushing forward the idea that we didn't just need to study bodies of water to determine the health of the ecosystem, but we also had to study everything around it, right? The surroundings, the organisms, as well as the body of water to really understand the health of the ecosystem. Ruth specialized in diatoms, which you see in this little book here. They have some cool shapes. And this book is the Diatoms of the United States, made in 1966. Diatoms are single-celled algae, and they're found at they are really found at the bottom of the food chain. So they're a main source for organisms found higher up. So if that's a main source of food, you want to make sure they're still living. And they also are able to photosynthesize or convert carbon dioxide to oxygen. So you want to make sure those are thriving in water. Whew. Gertrude Corey, biochemist Gertrude Teresa Radness, later Corey, was born in 1896 in Prague. She was interested in math and science since she was young, and she was lucky enough to have family that encouraged her and pushed her to later go to medical school. She would, and at school, she would later meet her future co-collaborator and husband, Carl Corey. In the 1920s, they would later flee the United States for their own safety due to Gertie's Jewish heritage. However, due to Gertie also being a woman, once they got to the United States, she still wasn't treated as like an equal in scientific institutions. She was never made a full professor until 2 months after receiving the Nobel Prize, which she did win with her husband in 1947 in physiology or medicine. They won the prize for their, end quote, their discovery of the course of the catalytic conversion of glycogen. Ooh, I did not hit the timer. Ooh, that was a foul for me. Sorry about that. I was wondering why it was going on for, I didn't hear the beeping yet. Mary Jane Peale. Artist Mary Jane Peale, she hails from the Peale family, so family of artists. Charles Willson Peale was a revolutionary. She was born in 1827 to Rubens and Eliza Beard Patterson Peel. She had a natural talent for art, starting art when she started art school or school in general. Her teacher asked her how long she'd been learning and training, and she surprised her by saying, you know, she hadn't had that much training at all. So she really had this ingrained talent, which makes sense from coming from the Peel family. She would learn and study from her uncle Rembrandt as well, who would send her information, you know, guide her in painting. He would actually send her palettes and how to mix certain paints together and dealing with chemistry of that. And we also have that in our collection as well. She loved art so much that she said on her birthday on February 17th, "Today is my 25th birthday. This day I've made up my mind to furnish a room and commence painting professionally." Okay. Lady Jane Franklin. Lady Jane Franklin, originally Jane Griffith, was born in 1791. She was married to Sir John Franklin, who went missing in the Arctic during an expedition. Sir John and his ships Erebus and Terror left in May 1845, and they were never seen from again, which, you know, pretty scary. After 2 years of not hearing from him, Lady Jane starts sounding the alarm, and people at first, you know, are like, yeah, let's give us some more time, but Lady Jane persists. She's very persuasive. She's a very strong-willed woman, and she actually succeeds in persuading two governments, actually multiple governments, and the public to help search for her missing husband. She managed to get the British and American governments to assist in the search. She also had a wealth of her own, so she funded expeditions to the Arctic and also got donations to help try and find her husband. All right, Grace Brewster Murray Hopper. All right, great mathematician, early computer programmer Grace Brewster Murray Hopper, goodness, that a lot of names there, was born in 1906 in New York. She received her master's and PhD in mathematics. She would go on to teach at Vassar College, but when the war broke out, she joined the Navy Waves Women and accepted for voluntary emergency service. At first, they wouldn't let her into the program due to her small size, but again, she persisted and she managed to find a way around it and they made an exception for her. And then by 1944, she was commissioned as a lieutenant and assigned at Harvard University at the Bureau of Ordnance Computation Project. It was here she worked on the Mark I, an early kind of computer. Hopper was one of the early computer programmers and would go on to write the manual that you see here. Both these come from the manual in our collection, and she was also ones that hand punched some of these holes as well. All right, Jane Aikens, printer. Jane Aiken was born in Scotland in 1764. Her family would go on to move to Philadelphia when she was around 7 years old. She would as you see here on your screen, these are transactions of the American Philosophical Society, and she would actually print some of the transactions of the American Philosophical Society. Her name is down here, Jane Aikens, printer. But she inherited this business from her father, who was a well-known printer himself. She also had an older brother, but he was disinherited. And so Jane would take over the business once her father died. Unfortunately, she would also inherit her father's debt. So throughout our collections, you can also see her trying to deal with this debt, and she was assisted at times by APS librarian John Vaughan, who at one point brought back Aikens' equipment at a sheriff's sale because it was confiscated, and then he leased it back to her. Whew. All right, water break. That was a lot of talking for a second. And the names you see on your screen here are all the women we've mentioned so far. It's about 15 names. We still got 15 more to go. So if you also need a water break, take it now. All right. I think we got all those names up. I think we can continue on. All right. Janine Duane. Okay. Math and reading teacher Janine Duane was born in 1932. She hailed from New Jersey. She was interested and pursued acceptance into NASA's teacher in space program. She unfortunately wasn't accepted to go into space, but she continued to be a space ambassador teaching STEM to students. Her family actually donated this flight suit to the APS, to the APS, and you can see her both her history and the program's history in the patches here and pins. So that's pretty cool to see at the right time. All right, Ruth Bendig. Anthropologist Ruth Bendig was born in 1887 in New York. She was one of many students of Franz Boas. She was also partially deaf. She received her PhD in anthropology in the 1920s. One of her well-known books were The Patterns of Culture. She also showed her support of the theory of cultural relativism, which Franz Boas is a big proponent for and put forward, that we shouldn't judge other cultures by our standards, but view them on their own terms. And in this letter, Benedict is actually checking in with her mentor, Franz Boas. And of course, many of his students, he was a proponent for women scholars, for women anthropologists. And you could see how close he was to many students, that they call him Papa Franz. So you could see through some of these letters that everyone got along really well, but they also checked in with each other about the different projects that they were doing. Lydia Marie Child. All right, Lydia Marie Child, a writer and abolitionist. Lydia Maria Child was born in 1802 in Massachusetts. She was really the main breadwinner of her and her husband, because her husband always seemed to be getting in trouble with business ventures, or his editorial opinions occasionally got him sued. She created and edited one of the first children's magazines in America, Juvenile Miscellany. She became famous from it, and well known in the literary circles. Over time, she did get involved in the abolitionist movement, but she also researched it very intensely before fully committing to it. And when she went all in. After years of research, she published in 1833 an appeal in favor of the class of Americans called Africans, which calls out the system of slavery, but also points not just to the South, but the North's role in it as well. In this letter, she talks about her support of John Brown and what he did, and this support's actually from after his death. Madame Brionne. So let me start the timer. Almost got ahead of myself there. Madame Brionne, and I'm sorry again for the pronunciation, was born in 1744. She was an exceptional musician and composer. On the screen here is actually one of her compositions from our actually digital archive that you can see for yourself too. She was a friend of Benjamin Franklin when he was living in Passy in the spring of 1777 in France. Brionne hosted many salons when she was there, so where people could talk, be entertained, converse. And through her, Franklin was able to make connections with important French contacts before the US was actually recognized as an official country by France. But when they weren't hanging out at the salons together, they were spending their time having tea and playing chess, a favorite Franklin pastime. And you can find this and some letters in our archive as well. Jane Meekum. All right, Jane Meekum, the youngest and favorite sister of Benjamin Franklin, was born in 1712. While Jane didn't have all the advantages of her brother, she still took part in scientific endeavors in her own right, especially in soap making, which is a very complicated science. In this letter here, Jane relates how to make the family soap recipe, and even says at one point that it involves a great deal of philosophy. Benjamin himself couldn't even make soap as well as Jane, so much so that he would ask her to send soap out to him when he was overseas so he could give it to his friends. So it was a great party favor, I guess. And when Jane wasn't making soap, she was also conversing with her brother about a variety of topics, different books that he would recommend, but also inequality. At one point, she mentioned in a letter to Franklin about how many Boyles and Newtons they've lost because they didn't have the same advantages or access to what we consider basic necessities today. You can see Jane in our virtual exhibition, Dr. Franklin to Decide This, online. Mary Haas. Linguist Mary Haas was born in 1910 in Indiana. She completed her PhD at the age of 25 from Yale University with her dissertation, Grammar of the Tunica Language. She was mentored by Franz Boas and sent out to do field work for him. Haas worked with the last fluent speaker of the Tunica, and through their partnership, they created vast text and vocabulary of the language. Afterwards, she would go on to do field work with the Natchez language. This object on your screen is a Natchez account of the Trail of Tears. So if you look closely, she has translations right under the Natchez words. So Natchez words, and then translation by Mary Haas. And so this would be her field notebook that she would take with her. Florence Sabin. Let's start that timer. All right, research scientist Florence Sabin was born in 1871 in Colorado, and she was interested in biology and anatomy throughout her life. She's a woman of many firsts, as they say about her. She was the first woman who graduated at Johns Hopkins University. She was also the first woman elected to the National Academy of Sciences. She's also the first woman faculty at the Rockefeller Institute. And this is actually in our digital archive. You can see some of the reports from the Rockefeller Institute that were given to us, and actually read some of the work she was doing. This right here is actually her Sabin's acceptance letter to the National Academy of Sciences as well, accepting that election. One of the things Sabin looked at into in the Rockefeller Institute was what white blood cells did in fighting off diseases to tuberculosis infections. So she had a very wide interest, but she was also a woman of very first. Emma Seiler. Oop, gotta start that timer. Okay, singer and woman of science, Emma Seiler was born in 1821 in Bavaria. She was the 5th elected APS member. She was interested in investigating the voice and vocal tones because she felt that vocal injuries were happening because doctors didn't fully understand the subject very well. And so this was her laryngoscope right here to the left. And she would use it to investigate singing in different ways the body could produce different tones. Like, for example, how different tones could be produced from like contractions of vocal ligaments. She also had a book called The Voice of Singing, which in it described her work looking into vocal tones and how you could get different tones and different sounds. And so to your right here is also an image of her, Emma Seiler herself as well. And you can both find these on our online museum collection archive. Whew. All right, Florence Sabin. Biochemist Florence Sabin was born in 1897. In Pennsylvania. Sabin developed the method for, and quote, purifying crystalline tuberculin derivative. And she successfully isolated this protein molecule, tuberculosis protein molecule. And this is to the left of your screen is research that she went into about this. You can find more on a blog online on Florence Sabin. And to the right is an award for what she did, because over time she improved upon this procedure, and so it came to be, this procedure made it so that they created a standard test to diagnose tuberculosis. And if you look on here, it says she was the first person in the world to obtain the active principle of tuberculin in pure crystalline form. By means of the substance, tuberculin can be diagnosed at an early stage and curable stage. Whew. All right, Ada Louise Huxley, architecture critic Ada Louise Huxley, and you know, besides being in our collections, APS also has proceedings. So women produce a lot of useful knowledge that goes into our collections, goes into our archives, goes into our museums, and also goes into our proceedings. And Ada Louise Huxley is one of those people. And she was born in and then let me start the timer. There we go. Ada Louise Huxley was born in 1921. She won the first Nobel Prize for Distinguished Criticism in 1970. And this all started in the 1960s when she became an architecture critic at the New York Times, creating a window for really audiences for design. And she wanted people to think about architecture and its design and how it has an impact, not just on its surroundings, on the neighborhood, but also those living in the building. So you have to think about all these things that come together about architecture. And she talks more about this. And you can find this article from the Proceedings of the American Philosophical Society and what Ada Louise Huxley wrote online on JSTOR. It's free, and JSTOR is free up to for the regular account, so you can read that online. Mildred Cohen. All right. Mildred Cohn was born in 1913. She started college at 15 years old, majoring in chemistry. That's pretty astounding. She joined the doctoral program at Columbia, but was barred from teaching assistant positions that usually went to men. She worked for the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. So think of that as like pre-NASA. She was the only woman on a staff of 70 men. And this work is from her times at NACA. And they were trying to develop a fuel injection airplane engines. And this is a diagram of that. However, once the director realized that Cohen was a woman, he thought she would distract the men and told her she had to stay out of the lab. So she could only create experiments and then have her male coworkers do it in the lab. She couldn't go into it. And she would leave there realizing she wouldn't be promoted. Her work really focused on nuclear magnetic resonance, and this is notes from that, which showed behavior of like chemical bonds. And that work as NMR would go to MR, paved the way for MRIs. Sorry, I cheated there a little bit. All right, Cecilia Pink Kaboshkin, oh, hopefully I said that right, was born in 1900. She did her dissertation at Harvard University, and in her dissertation, she made the assertion that stars were made mostly of helium and hydrogen, which went against the common thought at the time. When her dissertation was read by Henry Norris Russell, he said this was a little too controversial and she should tone it down. She said the idea that the sun was and stars would predominate hydrogen would contradict really general consensus, because before that they thought that the sun and earth were similar. She listened to him, but after completing her doctorate, she would stay on at Harvard, but she couldn't really become a professor because that was denied to women at times. Later on, Russell would go on to make the same conclusion as Cecilia and write an article about it, mentioning Cecilia a little bit, and he would go on getting claim for that accomplishment. Margaret Mead. All right. Anthropologist Margaret Mead was born in 1901 in Philadelphia, another student of Franz Boas. She went on many trips to study different cultures in Oceania. This page is from one of those you see on your screen here, which you can find in Digital Archive, was from one of those trips, and she sends this letter back to Papa Franz, talking about her trip to New Guinea. She mentions about the people she's encountered and who she hopes to engage with later. She also talks about, how many villages, hamlets, and general populations, and also she notes the different languages from the different groups of people they've encountered. She also talks about how she's interested to learn more about the people and effect of close intermarriage. So she's looking into how the relationship between all that. And finally, she goes on to talk about general life, about things in there and how she's able to manage more activities, even though she's doing field work, like making real bread in vegetable garden. All right. Sophonisba and Giscola Peel Sellers. Starting up. All right, Sophonisba and Giscola Peel Sellers was the daughter of Charles Wilson Peel and Rachel Brewer Peel. So she had around 17 brothers and sisters, including herself. Her nickname was Sophie. Her name comes from, like many of her siblings, Renaissance artists. And like many of her siblings, she helped her father, Charles Wilson Peel, out in his museum, which he had here in Philadelphia, the first successful public museum. And in it, he had taxidermy animals, dioramas that we see today. And she was trained by her father to help collect and preserve specimens as well. And some of those specimens would have been, taxidermy with arsenic. Besides helping with taxidermy specimens, Sophonisba, or Sophie, also handwrote labels for the Philadelphia Museum following the Linnaean system. The Philadelphia Museum of Art also has some quilts that she designed that you can see online. Sophonisba and later her husband Coleman Sellers, their family and descendants would go on to document and preserve the legacy of the Peel Sellers family. Sally Franklinbosch, born in, almost did it again. Born in 1743, Sarah, or Sally Franklinbosch, is the only surviving child and daughter to Benjamin and Deborah Franklin. Sally was married to Richard Bache, in 1767, and they lived with Deborah until her death. And later on, when Benjamin would return from overseas, they would continue to live with their father, and Sally would act as sort of like the political hostess for people as they came over. But Sally was also a stout revolutionary herself. She raised money and supplies for the Continental Army, and she usually did this through the Ladies Association of Philadelphia. In this letter, which you can find on a Revolution City webpage, she's sending this to George Washington and talks about the 2,000 shirts that they made for the soldiers that they sent his way. And she also sends her father's regards, saying that Franklin said his very great and sincere respect to tell him that all the old generals here amuse themselves in studying the recount of his operations and approve highly of his conduct. Whew. And then finally, our last women, we went over 30, but our last women is the women of the APS today. APS has women in all departments of either the museum, the library, archivists, conservators, the society itself, all working hard today to provide you access with 2 stories from these women that we've learned about today, and working very hard to keep the society alive and keep promoting useful knowledge. Whew. And I didn't do a timer for that one, so if anyone's counting, sorry about that. But we made it through 30 women in 30 seconds. There they are. Woohoo! There we go. We made it through 30 women in 30 seconds, and I only needed 1 water break. So we'll move it on to questions. Mike, if you could read those out.
Oh, God, I'm muted. Can do, will do. Thank you, Allie. Take another water break while we let folks throw questions into either the chat or the Q&A feature. We'll hang out for a little bit longer than the prescribed 30 minutes to answer any questions that y'all have.
We did go through it quickly. There's a lot of confetti on my desk now.
Getting good use out of the confetti.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, Matthew. Happy to have you here.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Mary.
All right, so we have one question. What was your favorite fact you learned while studying these women?
Oh, wow. Okay. That's a hard one. Oh, I found Lydia, the one that kind of really got me interested was Lydia Marie Child. Just because this letter's so interesting when you read through it a little bit more. She goes in about her opinions on John Brown, and I guess I find her a little funny too, because she starts calling people from the South, like, people from the South who celebrated his death, old fogies. So some of her comments and everything else I found amusing, but also she has this rich history, and she able to communicate with a lot of different people throughout history too. That I didn't realize until I started looking more into our collections. And also Lady Jane Franklin is just fun because she knew what she wanted, and she was going to try her best to find her husband, and no one was really going to stop her.
Wonderful. So we have somebody who's never heard of Katarina Dashkova before. Curious about her being accepted to the APS. And did you say she was the first woman to be accepted?
Yes. I was talking really fast there.
1 minute.
Yes. Katarina was the first woman accepted into the APS. And it was interesting to note she was an international woman as well. She and Franklin really got along. She was a very smart woman. So Franklin picked up on that. But it is an unfortunate thing too that no woman was elected after her until about 1869. So that in the end also is like something to think about. Was that say overall? But yes, she was the first woman elected.
And was Florence Sabin related to the Sabin polio vaccine?
I'm not sure about that answer.
I don't know that one either.
Yeah, that question. I'll have to get back to you on that. There's 2 Florences here, so sometimes I get them, Florence Sabin and Florence Sabin. So I get my Florences a little bit mixed up sometimes. But I'm not sure about that.
Great. It's certainly something that we can follow up on, though.
Yeah.
And another question: are there any fields of study that you would like to see more women representing in the APS collections?
I mean, I feel like all sections should have all of them should have more women accepted. That I think I forget what the number is for how many women are in the APS right now. So I think there should still be, in all subjects, there should be more women, right? Because you still, throughout history, scientific societies did bar them. And remember, looking at the slide, many of those women aren't members, even though they did a lot of great things. So that's something also to think about.
Do we have time for maybe one more question? Anybody has anything? Feel free to throw it into the chat or the Q&A.
Again, if I went too fast, we recorded this, so you can slow it down later on. And I'll also be providing links to like blogs and everything else where you that have already been written about some of these people, so you can learn more.
Okay, so we have one last question. Can you speak to Quaker education a little bit more?
So in a couple of the members, a couple of the women I was looking into, they had mentioned like there are some women who grew up and their families didn't want them educated in anything. They had to be self-taught. I found a couple things with Quaker with a couple of these women that noted with it, since they were growing up in a Quaker household, Quakers believed that men and women should equally be educated, right, to help them make the right decisions and everything else like that. So they believe men and women should be equally educated, which allowed many of these women to flourish into the people they are, and actually learn the things they were interested in learning. But yeah.
Wonderful.
Sorry,
all right.
So
I think that about wraps it up.
Cool. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Sorry, I was taking some confetti off of my laptop right here. I appreciate you all joining us, and hopefully I can do this again soon on another subject if you all enjoyed it. Check out our events websites to learn more about upcoming events, and see you next time at our program. See you, everyone.
Thanks for joining, folks.